those expectations, being clear on that really prevents the right hand from not knowing what the left hand's doing, drama, and departments not liking each other, that kind of stuff. All that stuff kind of goes away if there's clarity of the role.
Welcome to the Property Management Brainstorm Show with Bob Preston. Bob is the lead consultant and podcast host at Property Management Brainstorm, the consulting and strategic planning company dedicated to the property management industry. This podcast is for property managers and company owners seeking an in-depth look into current trends toward adding doors, growing recurring revenue, and building a high-profit property management business. You'll hear from leading professionals on hot topics, success stories, and strategies for expanding your company and assuring your property portfolios are managed efficiently. Now, here is your host, Bob Preston.
Hello, brainstormers. This is Bob Preston, your host, broadcasting from our studio in Del Mar, California. I am really excited about today's episode because we're going to be talking about building high-performing property management teams. Before we get started, I would like to give a shout out to our amazing industry icon sponsors for supporting the show. SureVestor, Blanket, VPM Solutions, RentScale, APM Help, and Upkeep Media. These are all top-notch solutions providers in the property management industry, and I will provide more information and links to their websites in the episode notes. A high-performing team is not just a group of talented individuals. It's a cohesive unit that collaborates, focuses on continual improvement, and works toward achieving common objectives and outstanding results. In today's dynamic property management industry, building high-performing teams has never been more of an imperative, yet it has never been more challenging. On our show today, I will be joined by Gwenn Aspen, co-founder and president of Anequim, an organization focused on the property management industry to help companies be more efficient and successful. Gwen and I will dive into principles, strategies, and practices that enable organizations to harness the full power of their workforce to be their best, whether you are a property management team leader looking to build a high-performing team or an individual contributor looking to be your best within a group. This will be a valuable episode, so have a listen. Gwen, welcome to the Brainstorm. So happy you're here today.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here. I'm really excited.
Wonderful. I always start the show by learning more about my guests, so let's roll with that. Can you introduce yourself? Tell us more about your background and perhaps a bit about Anequim.
Yes, of course. So my name is Gwenn Aspen, and I'm the CEO of Anequim, which helps primarily property management companies or property management adjacent companies with all their labor needs, from virtual assistants, and I'm talking about like high-end virtual assistants, anything that can be done from behind a computer. Be done by these folks for a really affordable price point. So we find the right talent, make sure that they have the benefits they need to be amazingly successful on your team. And we also support business owners or managers in making sure that onboarding process is really great and that you're set up for success on the front end, because so much about that front end experience is an indicator for how the relationship's going to move forward. We also do call centers. So we have 24-hour call centers for rent manager clients and other larger multifamily property management institutions, as well as do a lot of back office accounting for folks. So kind of runs the gamut, but we're just trying to solve those labor problems for people and make sure that they love their business again. And then a little bit about my background is my husband and I owned Wistar Group Property Management in Omaha, Nebraska, for 16 years before we sold it to Pure. So we come at this from a point of view of knowing the headaches that property management company owners and small and medium-sized business owners face and trying to solve those problems with them with a team mentality.
So I've never done this before. I'm going to have a little fun with you, right? Podcast. because I'm going to ask you a rhetorical question. There's no right or wrong answer here. All right. So let's go with that. It's intended to kind of start the conversation, but it's important to get this out on the table. And here's the question, Gwen. Is building a high-performing team just an ideal, or is it really something that's achievable?
It is actually achievable, but I do understand why you ask and pose the question, because I've dealt with teams at all levels. I mean, we started our property management company by literally putting up our shingle, saying that we had our license and taking any piece of garbage with a roof on it. And so the talent that we could attract at that moment versus now is so tremendously different that when I was in the weeds with some of those like really rough houses and apartment buildings that we were managing, I wondered also, can you really have this incredible team that inspires you daily? I mean, is that really possible for the small and medium-sized business? But it absolutely is, if you can provide people with jobs where they're learning and growing and a strong vision that they can get behind. If you have those two things, and then you work with your team on making sure that it's executed effectively, you all can go to work and truly love the experience of working with these people. And I promise it's possible.
Well, that's an interesting perspective, because I suppose, to your point, it's kind of in the eyes of the beholder and where you are in the growth and development of your own company and the image that the owner wants to reflect within the business too. Like you said, in the early stages, when there might just be a few properties and maybe they're not the best, let's just say that, it might be challenging to attract those high-performing individuals, but you got to work through that, right? So maybe, I mean, how do you look at that? The standards maybe a little lower there than they might be like further down the road, I guess.
For me personally, it's just been I think business ownership is such a head game of the person owning the business. And it really has been for me, and I can only speak for myself, a personal growth journey. And when I decided that what I was tolerating was no longer tolerable for me, the business grew and the people I worked with grew. So it really is like, what do you think you deserve? What do you think your business can achieve? And if you really think that your business, maybe it's small right now, but if you could sell an employee on the vision that you have and the growth that they'll see and the person they're going to become while on your team, I mean, you can tell that story even if you're managing out of your garage. And if you can tell it successfully, you can get those great people on a team. So it really is that head game of what you think you deserve and, that what you're willing to tolerate.
Okay. So what's the secret? If, you're talking to your average person who maybe is a company owner and they're struggling with this, how do I build a high-performing team? Where do they start and what should they do, right, in terms of building a high-performing team for their property management company?
Okay, so back to the vision. I honestly think if you want a high-performing team, you want to kind of play the pretend game. Like, what would it feel like to work at a place that the people that you want to attract would like to work at? So for me, that starts with, actually, weirdly enough, the tenant experience, the vendor experience, and the owner experience. If high-performing people don't want to be dealing with fires every day, all day. So honestly, it starts with making those different interests not yell at you. And if you can reverse engineer from the experience of the people that you work with, if you can make that experience very high end, and then reverse engineer to the people that you're working with, and what are those job descriptions? I go back to the being very clear about what the job is, what winning looks like in those roles. And if you think about it very holistically like that, I think that's the first place you start when you're designing a high performance team. And so as you're designing those job descriptions or redesigning them, like maybe go back to if you have a few employees and you're like, I don't really know what you do all day, or I don't really think that we have our roles clearly defined. Whenever companies are stagnant or just having kind of a rough moment, going back to those job descriptions totally is the clarity I think a lot of companies need. Once you have that clarity there, that's when you can finally start asking people to perform better, and you can have KPIs, and you can say, these are the expectations I really need. They're all written down. It's very organized. This is what I need from you. And then when you're asking for that accountability, that's when you say, this person's working or not working for me.
Okay. So we don't have time to dive into this topic and probably do it justice today, but I want to ask you about the Entrepreneurial Operating System, otherwise known as EOS. Now, you run EOS in your organization, correct?
Yes. I'm a giant fan.
Okay. I got that. I'm like reading about you and you're being on your website and whatnot. So for those not familiar with EOS, can you just, brief us on the core principles and what it's all about?
Yes. So EOS, I always define it a little bit. It's kind of like the grown-up in your organization. That's how we came across it. I had a maintenance guy when I had my our property management company come to me, and he was really complaining about his job. And I said to him, look, Tom, there are no grown-ups. We're the grown-ups. We have to figure this out. And I left the office in a huff. And this is back when they had bookstores. I went and drove to the nearest bookstore and I was just like looking for the answers. And I found the book Traction, which is what EOS, it's like the main book. And I read it, and in the bookstore, I thought, oh my God, this is the grown-up I was looking for. This book is the grown-up in our organization.
Kind of a recipe, isn't it? Sort of a recipe for company health. That's how I like to refer to it.
It is. And so basically what EOS does is it helps you simplify things. What are your goals? How are you going to hold people accountable? What are you going to measure? And then it gives you a system and a cadence to your meetings and a cadence to your year that helps you drive the bus forward with focus and intention. I don't know. Is that a good way to describe it?
That's fantastic. Now, are you a trained implementer by chance? Have you ever done that to be trained?
No. And as a small business owner, and I mean, my podcast is called Bootstrappers. Mm-hmm. So I've bootstrapped everything. I literally bought the $14.99 book at the time. That's how much it cost. And I read it, and then I bought it for my whole team. And nobody read it because I was like my new shiny object. I'm like, oh my God, this is going to change our lives. We all have to read this book. Nobody read it. Nobody reads books anymore. And so then I just got frustrated, and I didn't start at the beginning. EOS wants you to do this whole like vision day, like 2-day project, but I wasn't going to get my team on board for that. So all I did is I said, I want to take over the weekly meeting and I want to run it with my own agenda. Will you allow me to do that? And I started with that weekly meeting and running the agenda in the EOS way. And within 3 meetings, they were hook, line, and sinker on board. And we ended up purchasing the software 90.io about a month later, and everyone was bought in. So that's what I recommend people do, is just start with a meeting first, and then you can go, once you have the buy-in with the team, then go back to the 2-day session.
I love that. And then you're on your way to building a high-performing team. So
yes,
a little bit more detail on, I don't want to dive into this, but EOS sort of divides your company into 6 specific categories where you want to perform well, right? I mean, that's kind of what it's all about. Mm-hmm. And I think one of the most underserved is vision. You mentioned it earlier, right away. Well, you got to have a vision, right? And yet it's one that a lot of companies don't do very well at, including my own. When I still had my property management business, which I also sold to Peer, we have that in common, North County Property Group. And every year I had my team go through the online assessment. It's free, right? It's on there. It's on the EOS website. And it's, I think, 20 questions that you answer, and it gives you back these scores between 0 to 100. And we always did really well in all these different categories, except for vision. And I just was astonished because I thought it was so obvious, right? But apparently it wasn't. And perhaps that is because it was all in my head, or maybe when I talked, nobody listened. I don't know. But why is not having a clear vision, and you kind of touched on it earlier, such a problem for a workforce? And is it a common issue that you see with property management teams?
Yeah, terribly hard industry. I mean, I remember feeling uninspired by our vision, especially when we started out. I was like, I actually didn't even at the beginning of my business journey, really even understand the point of having values. I was like, I don't know. We don't screw people over. I mean, is that enough of a value? I was like, it's a rough and tumble industry. We're cleaning up these really, rough properties. I mean, how visionary is this? Like, we're just getting our job done. And I mean, and that's why I'm saying business is a journey. Now I look at property management and I see it from such a totally different perspective. I'm like, housing is on Maslow's pyramid as like one of the most basic needs. Generally stressful to rent a home in any way. The whole process is stressful. And isn't it like a little piece of giving back to the world to do it well and make it easy and make someone love living in their home? I mean, to me, that seems like such a gift that you could give the world, like a huge, tremendous contribution.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think as business owners, if we see our job that way and we see every interaction being important and giving somebody a positive experience in maybe what otherwise is a very rough, difficult day. And if we can convey that day in and day out with our team, they get buy-in from that. I mean, you can take that vision and you can give it to someone else. And our teams are looking for vision. I mean, depression and loneliness are epidemic in our society. And as business owners, if we can give people purpose and tell them that their job matters and that they matter, they will not leave you if they really feel that way. And if on top of that, you use the EOS system and you give them a rock and you say, I believe in you. I want to stretch you a little farther. I need this project done and I need you to lead it. And I'd like to coach you through it, but this is your project. You own it. This is your baby. Those people aren't going to leave us if we're doing those things for them.
Starting to sound a little bit like company culture. So where does that fit into this conversation? As a team leader, you can't really force the adoption of a company culture, but you can certainly help create it or lead it, I suppose. But really, in the end, it has to come from the team. Am I right about that?
It totally does. And I feel, so I have teenage girls. So I don't know if anyone who's dealt with teenagers, you have this vision for like how your day's going to go. And then you get your teenagers home from school and you're like, well, that wasn't what I expected. But I think that company culture is kind of similar. And it's the tiny habits, the tiny moments that create the whole company culture. So it's from how you greet them in the morning to how you recognize success to how disciplined you are and if you make meetings on time or if you're late and if you hold people accountable. It's the little habits that create company culture. Just like in our household, it's like, do we eat together or do we eat separate? Are clean rooms important? Are they not important? Is saying thank you important or not? Those little moments are what create family culture or company culture. And so if you start with what habits you think are important to you and the kind of environment you want to work in. And also how we treat our employees is how they treat the customers. And so if we treat them with a high degree of respect, but also responsibility, and we say when they go low, we go high, and we treat them in a respectable way, they're going to treat the tenants and the owners and the vendors that way. So I don't know if that's an answer to your question, but
yeah.
It might be a little bit different way of approaching it than what other people have said.
So it's tough today because we have this multi-generational workforce. Also got boomers still, mixed in with Gen X, millennials, Gen Zs now are starting to come into play. So what challenges does that put? Because some of the stuff you were talking about is, okay, doing things the same way, treating people correctly. Maybe we haven't really talked about incentivizing people and stuff like that yet, but these different generations have different ways of viewing what you were talking about. So what's a person to do?
They totally do. And I think it's interesting. And I was thinking about this because also put another wrench in that, Bob, like I work with a international team. So put some cultural elements into that.
Sure.
And then you have even additional complexity. I will say the really interesting thing is our teams mostly run virtual. I mean, almost everything's virtual at our business.
Mm.
And we have fewer of those cultural issues than we did when we were all in the office. We had a 19-year-old and an operations girl in our property management office and an 80-year-old sales guy.
Wow.
I know. He had so much energy, but I'll tell you, the problems I had with what he thought was appropriate in an office setting and what she thought was appropriate at the office setting couldn't have been more different. And I do see that now that we're working more virtually, I don't have those problems anymore. I don't have that drama anymore in the office. So going virtual can kind of cut down on some of those issues. But aside from that, one of the things to think about when you're looking at your company and all these different generations working together, the number one thing as a manager is you have to be able to talk about the elephant in the room. So if your 80-year-old sales guy is making super inappropriate jokes to the 19-year-old, that has to be addressed, and it can't be, you can't beat around the bush. And so I think you have to be really clear on what's acceptable at your own business and then hold the line. And people get it once you set the tone. I had a vendor have very sexual, inappropriate comment in one of our virtual meetings with the team.
Mm-hmm.
And I cut it off right away and was like, we're moving on. And so,
Right. Yeah.
So that set the tone that, look, go have fun with your friends. I don't care what you talk about, but this is a workplace and I'm not going to get sued over this call. So, so I think just having kind of clear boundaries as a business owner, what's acceptable, what's not acceptable, cuts kind of the problem. And then as far as motivation goes, just knowing each individual on your team really well, because it is hard to kind of categorize Gen Z's like this, Gen X is like that, especially when you're in a multi-generational, or I'm sorry, a multicultural
Yes.
team. Those things that we think are clear in the United States of a heuristic of a specific generation, it doesn't apply to people who grew up in the 90s in Mexico during the peso crisis, right? Like there are cultural events that formed their lives are totally different. So I do vision boards for each of my members on my team. And I want to know what their dreams are, what their true life ambitions are, what's important to them. And then when we're working on projects, you can't do it with every project. But if I have an opportunity to merge like their overall goals with what we're doing right now, I try to do that. And then they're seen as an individual rather than like a cohort with their generation.
Sure. Yeah. I always used to like one of the EOS metrics too was problem solving, right? And I always used to think that was one of the more valuable areas to be focused on because, how you problem solve, especially as multi-generational, we were also multicultural, really, really important. And we always scored extremely high on that one. And I think it was because of the overall transparency within the organization. So, I have a Silicon Valley background. I was a former technology executive. And, back in the day when I was there, it was a little more touchy-feely than you can get away with today and more team building and all this kind of stuff. So we never went that far, but it was the same principle and the same philosophy. It's okay, let's get in a room every now and then and let's dig in and everybody gets to share, everybody gets a piece of the action, everybody can speak up, and we might have disagreements, that's totally fine, but at the end of the day, you know what? We're going to make a decision, and then when we leave the room, I expect everybody to be on the same page, and I don't want to hear about it, right?
Yeah.
Want to bring it up again in a future meeting? Fine, we'll go through it again. But in the meantime, okay, this is what we came up with. And regardless of culture, regardless of generation, people could always get on board with that because they had a piece of that decision, if that makes sense.
Yes. So you got the buy-in first.
Mm-hmm.
I think buy-in to an extent, like it's not a democracy. Like at the end of the day, the owner of the company is going to make the decision, but you were heard and we thought about your ideas. And then we made a decision. You said you all get behind it. I think before you can get to that place, there are two things that have to happen. One, you have to build up trust, especially with virtual teams. It's hard to build that trust that you have like in an office setting.
Harder, yes.
And it is harder. And for drivers, like I like to get things done. I want to move fast, but I do take the time with the teams that I'm really managing we do 15-minute huddles. And yes, we go through the to-dos and what we're going to get done, but we do spend 5 minutes just talking about good news, because that trust actually saves me time later. Because if I write a really quick email that doesn't have the niceties in it, they're going to take it in the right way because we spoke that morning and we were talking about our pets. So it actually saves me drama later if trust is built. So if you have the trust as like the pillar, and then as a business owner, a manager for your high performing team, sometimes that the environment has gotten toxic somehow, but you're not exactly sure who's the toxic, like who's the linchpin of the toxicity.
Yes.
But if you're talking more about things that don't drive you towards your ultimate goals, like drama or relationships or things like that at the office, instead of, how do we meet this goal faster, better, whatever your metrics are, that's an indication that you have toxicity on your team. And then your job as a manager is to figure out who the heck is kind of stirring that pot. And so that can cause the teams to not be on the same page, as if they're these little dramas that you might not even know about kind of happening. And then if you have no drama and the team is healthy and then you have trust built, then when you say, okay, here's the decision, we're moving forward, everyone's aligned. And that's when the magic happens. That's when running a business is truly fun.
Yeah. And it's interesting, the toxicity comment, because even sometimes you can identify that person, but I've done this before. I'm guilty of this. As a business owner, I've been reluctant to try to fix it because I was scared. I was scared that if I took someone out of the position or I let somebody go, it was going to cause more damage to the company than allowing that person to remain. And I think that was horrible when I did that. And eventually it would come to a head and I would deal with it. And then immediately it was like this veil was lifted, and I could just see it in everybody's faces, well, God, Bob, about time, like they were just kind of waiting for something to take place. Right. And it never did. And then finally, when I did, everyone's like, hallelujah, we can all get back to work now. We don't have this daily drag on our workplace. Really interesting.
That's such a hard management lesson, isn't it?
It is.
It's probably one of the hardest. And especially if you have a really fast growing business and you're scaling like crazy, and then you have this loyalty, this person that helped you at the very beginning, that came on board and believed in you. And then if they don't scale at the pace of the business, it's extremely painful. It's extremely painful. But I think it's really important to think of the business as a whole. The business serves, as we talked about before, the tenants, the owners, the vendors, and their experience with your company is important to their lives. The experience of your good employees, they need to have a good experience at work. And so that's where the rubber hits the road. And that's why our jobs can be really tough. We have to be the hard ones who are like, this doesn't work anymore. But I will say, if you have really clear job descriptions, if you have really clear KPIs and you know what winning looks like and you know what you're not going to tolerate, when you're really clear on that, those decisions come so much more easily. The other piece of that is if you haven't had really well documented procedures, or you kind of was just letting them run wild, it can be very painful to let that person go. And so you hold on to them because you're like, I don't have time to like redo the whole sales team or the whole operations team. But I promise you, if you just bite the bullet, there are so many more problems underneath the surface that if you wait longer, it will just be worse, right?
It becomes more toxic with you taking care of it. Like there are always excuses. Oh, well, it's the holidays, I can't do it now. Or, oh, they just had their birthday. I can't do it now. Right. But ultimately it needs to be done. Well, it's a good, interesting segue, because you're starting to touch on an area that is also pretty deep, but I think we can hit it today. And that's accountability. When you start talking about accountability, you can get into all kinds of things. Earlier, you mentioned KPIs. There's also, I've heard you speak of, just in this conversation, processes, procedures, systemization. So there's all kinds of ways to approach it. But let's talk about that a little bit, and the best ways to achieve accountability, perhaps ways to make expectations clear. I've heard you say that several times already, and how that plays out in building a high-performing team.
Well, how about I start with a failure? How I was a terrible manager. So I had this woman, she was a customer service rep at the property management company, and I wanted to be liked by her, but she was doing a really poor job. And we did do a good job at doing quality control, and we'd listen to calls every day, and then we give people feedback. So every day I'm giving her this feedback that's like negative. Well, the negativity is the negative stuff is what I want to deliver and what I want her to improve on. But I'm so concerned about her liking me for my own sake, because I'm like insecure or whatever, that I did the crap sandwich that's known in a different, if we were at a bar, I would say it in a different way. But you say the positive thing on the front end, and then you say the crap that you actually want to say in the middle, then you end it all positive at the end. So I'm doing this every single day. Well, this employee is super optimistic. So she misses the whole meat of the deal and is only focused on the positive things. And so I end up firing her, and she is completely shocked. And I hear through the grapevine, it's hard for her to find another job. And I'm just like dying inside. And it was a moment where I realized that clarity truly is kindness. And that if I'm giving feedback in a way to solve my own insecurities, instead of really caring about the person I'm talking to and being very clear about the truth of the matter, I'm not doing them any favors. And so clarity is really important. Now, there are ways to be clear. So when I give feedback, I want to be very clear that this is not going well, but I don't want it to create shame in the person. So I like to say, look, this is not going well. Your job performance is very bad, but I believe in you as a human that you can do this. So one person that comes to mind, they had too many jobs. Like they worked for us, but then they were like a photographer, and then they had a family business that they helped with. And I'm like, and then they were a coach. And her problem was she wasn't focused on the job that was giving her benefits and, making the majority of her money. And so that was easy for me to be like, look, this job's not going well. This isn't going to work out if X, Y, and Z doesn't happen. And you're a beautiful person. You're so talented, but you just have to focus more, So do you see what I'm saying? Like you can be nice and like not damage their view of themselves and still be very clear that the work is unacceptable.
So, okay, then what is it that establishes that clarity? Is it putting these KPIs in place, telling them exactly what you're expecting of them and putting it in measurable form? Is that what it is?
Yes, I think that, and going over those like through an EOS methodology where people are clear that it's not going in the right direction. But I do think it's more than that, because people have a tendency to be really optimistic until you're really clear about what you want. So I've been doing the PIP forms. We do PIP forms for all of our virtual assistants too. And so it's hard for people to say, like, if this, and these metrics don't get met, if this doesn't improve, we're going to be going in different directions. But I truly think that that's the clarity people need. And that's the clarity a lot of managers are afraid to give. But if you're at the point where someone might be losing their job, that's what's required. Another thing with high level employees, it's really hard to do it, because it's easy with a low level employee. Like you needed to touch all these maintenance service issues in this week, and you only touched 75% of them. So bad on you. But for your COO, their economic changes or whatever happens, it's harder. So sometimes I have gone through where I rewrote the job description, especially if the business is scaling, that job that's required of them is changing. So rewrite the job description. And then at the bottom of that, have the things that didn't go well the last year or the last quarter, whatever the last review period was, and have a frank discussion about what didn't go well and what your expectations are in a similar situation moving forward. Have them sign it. And then that creates a whole lot of clarity of what's expected. But I think people have to really get to that point if you want to have a high performing team, because if people know you're fair, because then you're going to fire this person, your team has to believe it was the right choice, and they have to believe that it was fair. And so if you have a track record of being fair with people, then drama goes down and your team performs better.
One of the things I liked to do, and this came from the EOS methodology, is what I call the accountability chart. Accountability is huge. And in this case, the accountability chart was just sort of a summary. We were a functionally organized company when I had North County Property Group. So, there's portfolio organizations, there's other types of ways, there's hybrid. We were functionally or departmental. So it was really important for all the people on the team to understand what the other person did. And so we would go over this pretty much quarterly. Hey, here's the accountability chart. Sometimes responsibility was a change, shift between people, but here's who what this person does. Here's the bullet list of the top things. And then those were typically used by their direct supervisor for weekly one-on-ones. Are you a big one-on-one fan?
I'm a huge one-on-one fan, and I like them for that reason, to go over those KPIs. Yes.
All right. And you earlier mentioned, I heard you mention it, and this is also EOS rock, our vernacular. I don't want to, push EOS too much, but you use the term rock. Okay. So we always gave our employees rocks, or, for those who aren't familiar with EOS, it's basically just goals or objectives. Mm-hmm. And they're for some measurable period of time. We always made ours quarterly. Sometimes they can be monthly. I suppose it could even be weekly. I don't know. But and so those rocks or those goals and objectives need to be tied back to that accountability list. And those typically are where the KPIs can come in, and some of the measurable ones, right? Because those might change.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that's why I like the 90.io software, is because it not only gives you agendas for your quarterly meeting, your annual meeting, your weekly meetings, and then it also can show you if you have multiple teams, like if you're a business owner and you're not in all the 90 or all the weekly meetings, you can look and see their agenda and see what they covered and make sure that you like what was done in that meeting. But it also has a really good org chart built into it, so that anybody at the business can go into it's a functional org chart. You can go into someone's role and see what is expected of them. And that really, those expectations, being clear on that, really prevents the right hand from not knowing what the left hand's doing, drama, and departments not liking each other, that kind of stuff. All that stuff kind of goes away if there's clarity of the role.
I really like that. And so, okay, well, so let's say now that we've got a team that's working well together. They're well on their way to being a high-performing team. They've got goals, they've got objectives, they have their accountability, they have their KPIs. Let's look on the tail end of that, because I meet a lot of property management companies and company owners in the industry. And I think another underserved area, and you touched on this earlier as well, is observing and recognizing achievement and people that are doing those good jobs, right? Kind of celebrating the achievements. And I think you also touched on regular performance reviews. I mean, what a concept, right? I mean, some of this stuff, particularly in what you do professionally and also within your own company. I mean, do you agree? And, why are those fundamentals so critical?
So about like celebrating the wins, are we talking about that piece specifically?
Yeah.
So I do believe in celebrating the wins.
Wins, and then part two would be performance reviews, I guess.
Oh, yes. And the performance reviews. Well, a few things with celebrating the wins. I'm going to go, like, I've learned everything by just doing it the wrong way. So I used to think everyone was motivated by money. Like, oh, you just want to, they did a good job, throw some money at them. And that can get you in trouble in a number of different ways. Really, when you're learning about your team members, ask them how they like to be recognized and what they value, and like if they really win, what would be important to them, and get a feel for it. Because sometimes people like parties, sometimes people hate recognition and it's embarrassing and they just want it one-on-one. They want to know from you that they did a good job. Some people love it. So you can, especially in a small team, you can really customize what winning looks like and how you recognize that per team member so that you hit them where they are. So that would be one way to celebrate the wins. And then for the reviews, the annual reviews, I think they're hugely important. We have a cadence with all of our virtual assistants where they get annual reviews and get the feedback, because a lot of the times they're starving for, am I doing a good job? I mean, are you happy with me in a general way? How do you see I can grow? And those conversations really are important. And for your true A players, they need that, because they need to know that they're growing year to year, or they're going to go somewhere where they feel like they can grow faster.
Man, it's so important. And yet, it's so hard to take the time to do sometimes as a business owner, because in property management, especially, I mean, well, I suppose in all businesses, we're all running so fast and it's so dynamic, and you've got people, calling and texting and emailing and all this incoming noise. And then to cut through all that and spend the time and let's face it, it is kind of a time consuming and methodical thing to do on an annual basis, or whatever the kind of the schedule is for that. Like, man, it's so critical. I think too, I used to sometimes just get up and walk around and go through the bullpen, drop in on people's offices, just have these one-on-one conversations on kind of spontaneously, and just simple thank yous, right? Or,
yes.
Oh, I saw you do this. And we were in an environment where I could overhear people's conversations, right? And every now and then I'd hear something that just went brilliantly. And I would try to always make it a point of getting up and walking over and say, wow, that was a tough conversation. You did that really, really well. Thank you. Maybe more that kind of stuff can go, right?
It's amazing. And I do think a lot of us focus on the negative. The world focuses on the negative, but I learned a really great lesson we have Boys Town, which is an orphanage here in Omaha, and they also do group homes and things like that. But at Boys Town, they have these like parents, like 2 adults live with like 8 teenagers, and they're only allowed to give 1 corrective action for every 8 positive things they say to a child. And they have to document it on these iPads. It's like a data-based system. And I always think about that. We need to hear 8 positive things for every corrective action as human beings, to feel like we're contributing, to feel like we matter, to feel like the job that we're doing has purpose. And I always, it's a gut check to see, hey, am I focusing on the right things? Am I giving enough positive reinforcement? Do people know what they matter, how they matter to the organization?
That goes for all relationships too, I suppose. Right?
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah.
I think about that so often, and I probably went to Boys Town on that tour, 15 years ago, but it stuck with me.
Wow. Well, we've barely scraped the surface on this topic. This would be fun to do as a panel someday. We should do that.
We should do that.
Really, think how cool that would be, and to have a little bit more time, a little bit more, maybe somebody moderating, it'd be a great topic. I don't know that I've ever heard it done like with this title, right? So we should do that sometime. But in the interest of time, we have to wrap up today. But what are some closing thoughts that you can share with our listeners about this topic?
Closing thoughts. I just want to, first of all, acknowledge that property management really is a difficult industry. And if you're in here and you're fighting every day, kudos to you. It's a total head game. And I think it's a good time of year to reflect on I always say we're going to have problems. We're always going to have problems. But what kind of problems do we want? Because like at the beginning of my business journey, I accepted a lot of like drama for my employees, and I allowed them to like get me enmeshed in silly situations. And then I decided I didn't want those problems. And so as you elevate in the business world and you become more of the business you want, my hope for all the property managers is that their problems become getting to their goals sooner, rather than drama or things not working out or tenants or owners yelling at them. And so it really is possible to have a business where your processes are so great, your people are so wonderful that you just don't have those headaches. You don't have those fires that you used to have. And I want everyone to have that experience of remembering what it used to be like and really knowing the calm that can happen with great processes and procedures, using EOS, having the right team. It really can be fun. And if you start with that vision, you can make the changes today that will get you there.
So everybody hear that? It's not just an ideal. It can happen. And we have Gwen telling that in the flesh. So go.
It can happen, you guys. You got this.
You can do it, right? Okay. If someone wants to contact you or Anequim to learn more about the company and your services, what would be the best way to do that?
Go to anequim.net, anequim.net. We have so much free information on our website. We have ebooks, we have podcasts, we have hundreds of episodes of podcasts talking about these problems of starting a business, running a business, scaling a business, of managing people. We're really frank and open about our challenges on there. But we just want to help business owners any way we can. So fill out a form. We'd love to get in touch with you and see if we can help you solve some of your problems. That's
wonderful. Lots of good stuff on the website. I can attest to that. I was there prepping for the podcast and found all kinds of cool articles. So thank you for that. Hey, Gwen, thank you so much for coming on the show today. That was so fun. Yeah,
it was my pleasure. Such a great time. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah, thank you. And I hope we get to meet face-to-face sometime in the near future. You're going to be at National NARPM?
Yes, I'll see you there.
Seek you out. Okay. All right. Thanks so much. Take care.
Thanks, Bob.
As we wrap up today, I'd like to make a quick plug to our listeners to click on the subscribe button, give us a like, and if you would, please pay it forward with a positive review. Thank you for tuning in to Property Management Brainstorm, where we are always working hard to find new ways to advance the property management industry, and we will catch you next time.